Let's go with this first leaf image. So to open it, you probably want to drag it to the icon, because if you have something open and drag and drop into Photoshop, it's going to do this and not open it as a separate document. So if you zoom in on this leaf, it'll probably look kind of pixelated. So I would drag it to the icon, or you can, depending on how you're used to using computers, you can right click and do an open with and aim it at Photoshop. So just make sure that you're opening this in a separate document window and it's not on top of the London City Hall thing. If you did accidentally get it in there, I think just hit escape and it should go away. From Photoshop, you could also do a file open and just point to that image as well. So one of the things that people who have used Photoshop before probably all know about is the magic wand or the quick selection tool. There's also this object selection tool. So these are all basically made to make quick selections of things so you can get rid of the background fast. However, they are the least clean and least accurate. And you really have to have a photo that is well suited to even use those tools in the first place. So I'll show you how it will fail on that London picture shortly. So in the fourth tool down, the magic wand and the quick selection work really similarly. So I'm going to start with the magic wand because it seems to be the thing. Like, if people can use the magic wand, they think they know how to use Photoshop. No, but okay. So if I click in the white area, I get all these. They're like casually called marching ants. I hope that doesn't gross anybody out. And that's how we see where a selection is in Photoshop. So I clicked on the white area, and what the magic wand does is it works on this tolerance number here. So it has a tolerance of 20, so it's saying, within, 20 of these like Photoshop measuring units, within 20 of those units of the color that was clicked on, it's going to automatically select. And they also have to be pixels that are touching. So if this leaf had a hole in it and I clicked out here, it would not pick up the hole. It's going to pick up like this continuous white background. Let me zoom out one more time. So you can see like the selection around the outside and around the leaves. So what I have selected right now is the background and not the foreground. So I also see people assuming this selects the foreground and then they hit their mask thing and it's backward and they're like, ah. So remember, we have the background selected, not the foreground. So the way that the magic wand and the quick selection tool can be useful is they're great places to start. They are terrible places to end. So this is a great way with the right image to start a selection quickly, and then you need to refine it manually. So I'm going to do Command or Control D, which is select and then deselect. If you are a menu person, you can use the menu as well. So that's just going to like cancel my selection. It's going to cancel those little marching ants. So let's try the quick selection tool to see which is different. So this one, I'm not going to change any settings. And if I click, I just get like a tiny little selection. But if you click and drag, so I have my mouse button held down, it sort of comes to a similar conclusion. Typically, quick selection is a little bit more accurate, but it all depends on the settings you're using. So they serve a similar purpose, but the quick selection tool is more of, think of it more like a selection brush, and the magic wand is more of a click and release situation. So anytime we have a marching ants type selection in Photoshop, we can add and subtract from it. So we will add by using the Shift key, and we will subtract by using the Option key. So typically our background is going to be, flatter and less interesting than our foreground. So that's the principle that the magic wand and the quick selection tool work on. So this isn't to say you couldn't use the quick select and magic wand on non-background things. That's just their most common purpose. So I've still got my quick selection tool, and I've done a deselect. So if I drag, I can get one of these leaves pretty easily. It takes the part of the shadow with it. That's fine. And if I hold the Shift key and drag on this leaf, it will pick this one up as well and add it to my selection. So you can use them on foreground or background. Typically, it's easier to select the background and get rid of it than it is to just select the foreground. But it's all going to depend on the picture. So that's why I've been encouraging you to take pictures or whatever on a sidewalk or like a piece of paper or some simple background so that this process is easier. So if I want to add the selection of this area here, so it's a part of the shadow that wasn't selected when I selected my background, I'm going to hold the Shift key and click and start dragging in that shadow. And I can see that the selection is being adjusted to include that area that I'm dragging over. Okay, I see these are similar pixels, but when it sees the leaf pixels, it's more like, okay, I realize this is different. I'm not going to automatically select those pixels as well. I'm going to hold Shift and get this part of the shadow too. And if you accidentally get I'm holding Shift to intentionally add a piece of this leaf. I don't want this part of the leaf selected because I want to select the background so I can easily get rid of it and just have the leaves. So in this case, I'm going to hold Option and start clicking and dragging in this area, and you can see it sort of doing the opposite. So it's removing from my selection, and I had a few little pieces in there. So to get this part, again, I am, trying to select the whole background. I don't want the shadow. So I'm going to hold Shift and start dragging in here, and it will get that extra background. Got this little piece by the stem on the second leaf. And using my quick selection tool brush to add the shadows to this background selection. And then if it kind of infringes too much, like it did here, I'm going to hold my Alt or Option key and, click and drag and sort of deselect that area. The other thing to know with this tool is that you can use your bracket keys to make the brush of that tool larger or smaller. So I'm looking at the ones that are just beside the P key. So the left bracket, my mouse where you can see it better. The left bracket makes that selection area of the brush smaller, and the right bracket makes it bigger. So this is true of any brush tools in Photoshop, and we will use this more. The default size was fine for what we were up to. All right, so once we've got our background selected, if yours isn't perfect, don't worry about it. This is a learning experience. We need to go to our Select menu and do Select Inverse. So this is going to select the opposite of whatever we have selected. So we are interested in having those leaves cut out from the background, but because the background is incredibly simple, it's way faster for us to select the background, and then we can just do a select inverse, and we will have the leaves selected. So when you do select inverse, you should only have those marching ants around the leaves, and you should not have it around the outside of your picture anymore. So for some of you, congrats on your first Photoshop selection. So there's plenty of things we could do with this now. We could drag it and drop it into the other picture we have. We could do adjustments on it. We could just put a mask on it. Plenty of things. So let's start with a mask. So again, we have the leaves selected, and then I'm going to click on this little button down here. So it kind of looks like the Japanese flag. It's a white rectangle with a circle in the middle of it. And if you hover over it, it says add a mask. So this should give you this weird grid as your background. So that's called the transparency grid. And it's there to let you know that there is nothing there. So when we saw white before, that was all white pixels. Remember, in Illustrator, that just meant like that was the background of our page. We hadn't covered it up. But that's vector stuff, and this is pixels. So if there's white, that's a bunch of pixels filled with white. If you see this grid, that means there's nothing there. You have, we haven't deleted it, we have masked it. And you'll see that you now have a second little icon on your layer 0. So it has a little like thumbnail of the picture, the actual picture, and then it has one of those mask thumbnails. And we have seen those before because all adjustment layers have masks on them as well. So these were just all white because it applied to everything. And in this one, we can see that the leaves are foreground objects that we wanted to have selected. Those are white in this thumbnail. So we can see that the white area is on the part that we can see, and the black area is covering it up. So in like ye olden times, they would use masking with like other materials so that when they were making, you know, analog photographs, the light was blocked, and they were only light was only shining through the negative in a certain part. So the toughest thing is to remember that like the white is the part where it shows, and the black is the part that's hidden. So once we have a mask, we can always edit it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and try to find a part that isn't quite, you know, not quite perfect. Little fuzzy, you might have like a little dent in it, like there's a little bit of shadow here. This stem looks a little weird. So pick one of those parts and zoom in on it. And we are going to use brushes like by hand or mouse or whatever you're using to edit this mask. So I'm going to go get my brush tool. Just looks like a little paintbrush. If you can't find it right away, just tap the B key and it should jump to it. You get this weird little like pop out showing you how to scribble behind some, I don't know, sea creature. So if you roll over the leaf, you should be able to see the size of your brush. And there's 2 dimensions that we can adjust in brushes. The size of it, and again, we'll use those bracket keys next to the P key. So the left bracket makes your brush smaller, and the right bracket makes it bigger. And it jumps by 5 pixels at a time. Once you get big enough, it jumps by 10, and then once you get even bigger, I think it jumps by like 20 or 25. And I can see that size changing up here. So right now I have a dot, like 70 is way too big for what we're doing. But I'm going to leave this large so I'm sure everybody can see it. So it says 70 and then there's a dot over it. So if I open my brush options, I also have a slider for my size. You'll just have to then, roll over your image to be able to see how big that brush actually is. And then there's also a hardness setting. So this is basically, in digital art terms, it's the feathering or how soft the edge of the brush is. So if I turn the hardness all the way up, you'll get a brush that has a very smooth edge to it. And if I turn the hardness all the way down, you get a very soft edged thing. It'll be more emphasized if I use like a huge brush. And I click once, you can see it has that like gradient. So that only the very, very inside is actually completely solid, whether I'm talking about a color or masking, drawing with a brush. And then it fades out from there. And then if I put the hardness all the way up, I can just take a clean circle punch out of that leaf. So I'm going to make this a reasonable size. The hardness is always going to depend on your picture. So this picture is like fairly in focus, but it's kind of small. So I'm going to probably hardness somewhere around like 70. So I don't want it to be perfectly like flat edged or it's going to look unnatural. If this were something that was partially out of focus, I would intentionally use a very soft brush to try to keep the like soft edge on it. So I'm going to go with 15 pixel size and like 70-75% hardness, somewhere in there. And I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is black. So by default down here at the bottom of your, toolbar, there's two solid swatches. So in Illustrator, we had stroke and fill, right? In Photoshop, we have foreground color and background color. Stroke is a separate effect that you have to like screw around to even put on anything in Photoshop. Just don't do it. So it's kind of like having two swatches there for quick access. And by default, they are black and white. If they're not, you can click on the tiny little swatch thing above in your toolbar and it'll set it back to the default black and white. So I've got this mask and I have this little piece that I don't want to be on there. So I want to cover that up, and I cover things up in masks with black. So I'm going to swap this. I'm going to use that little like double-edged or double-ended arrow that has 90-degree bend in it to swap so that black is my foreground color. It's always going to paint in your foreground color. And then if I paint over this, it will be hidden because I am masking it. So as long as I'm painting with black on a mask, it's going to hide things. So if you're doing this and black is showing up, you've selected your actual pixels and you will get this because you are painting black on pixels. Whereas if you're on your mask thumbnail, you will be further masking things. So if you made a mistake, just a subtle mistake like the one I'm making now, just tiny mistake, and you happen not to realize it, like you can't automatically do Command or Control Z and undo it, you can always swap your foreground color to white, and I'm going to make my brush bigger just to make this go faster. And if I paint on white, it's going to show my original pixels again. So anything I paint in white, it's going to show. And anything I paint over with black, it's going to hide. So take a look around your leaves and see if there's anything you want to smooth out or Maybe there was a piece that you missed when you made your initial quick selection. If anything looks like it got cut off, that's when I would go to the white brush and sort of try to bring something back. So the keys with masking, once you've got your mask on, are to make sure that if you want to adjust the mask, that you have your layer mask thumbnail selected. And if you want to actually like draw on or adjust the pixels, you need to be on the original image thumbnail. This is where like 80% of problems with masking comes from, is people start masking and they realize I'm scribbling in white or black. It's because you were not on the layer mask thumbnail, you were on the original layer. So when you accidentally do the scribbling, which I will do now to your delight, that's not an extra layer. That's permanent unless I just right now undo it. Oops. And that's not how to undo it. Command Z. So this, like, Photoshop needs a very good attention to detail as far as what you're drawing where. So we're not going to do much drawing in Photoshop, but if you're using the brush tools for some reason other than masking, like to actually put color somewhere, it doesn't automatically make a new discrete shape. That's Illustrator and that's vectors. Pixels is just, it's there. If you have a reason to be drawing stuff, thinking about like the digital sketchbook, if you want to play with brushes, there are tons of brushes in Photoshop. There are tons you can download and install that are great. You want to make a new layer first and then draw on that. So now I'm drawing on this layer 1. I can hide it. It's not attached to my layer 0. It's not permanent. So that's my warning, for because I know people like to doodle in Photoshop. Just please, like, you need to make new layers or it's all going to be fused together and be so hard to edit, and it's going to be frustrating. So if you choose to doodle in Photoshop, please remember to make yourself layers. All right, so we have a mask. We have cut something out from this image. So now if we want to move this to another document to start like doing our collage thing, we need to make sure that we are selecting the pixels that we want to move. So I want to take the leaves, but not the background. So if I just select this layer thumbnail, so just watch this part, don't follow along with it. I'm going to get my move tool. So if I click and I'm going to hover over this tab, and then I can come in and then I can drop it. There I've got my leaves. So you'll notice it also comes in with its layer mask. Photoshop did not used to be so smart.